to me, O Muse. The Odyssey, an original adaptation written and retold for you by Jon Buckeridge. Chapter 3: The Island of the Goddess. Odysseus looked out across the clear azure sea. He listened to the waves crashing softly against the shore, to the sound of the gulls on the breeze, smelled the fresh sea air and the scent of rich verdant trees. All around him was bliss and delight as lush as any man could ask for, and he hated it. To him the gulls cried home, and the sea whispered Ithaca as it lapped across the beach. When he had first watched up there 7 years ago, clinging to a branch and convinced his next breath would be his last, he had thought it was a paradise. But now it was a prison. Oh, he tried to escape, of course, but somehow the island would never let him leave. A tall, flowing, copper-skinned woman walked up behind him, and where she walked, flowers grew. Sleek squirrels and fluffy rabbits frisked around her heels, and butterflies landed in her hair. A soft, flowing music seemed to float through the air around her. She was not simply beautiful. She was beauty itself. She was the goddess Calypso, and this was her island. Everything here was as it was because she willed it so, and right now she willed Odysseus. She stretched her perfect hand out towards him and said, "Come to me." "I don't want to," replied Odysseus. She let fly a silvery laugh and smiled at him again. The sun beamed a little brighter, the sea became a crystal blue, and she simply said again, "Come to me." Odysseus hunched his shoulders and looked down at the sand. "I said no." A single cloud passed across the sun. The sea turned dark, and from somewhere a raven cawed. Calypso's music changed pitch, and a frown crossed her flawless face. "And I said, 'Come, my love.'" "I am not your love," said Odysseus, staring fixedly at the ground. "I gave my love to another a long time ago." The sun turned darker still, and the waves smashed against the shore. There was a shimmer in the air, the way it flickers above a fire. The butterflies flew from Calypso's hair, and the animals ran to hide. "And what is she compared to me? Look at me. Look at me." Odysseus hunched over further, and tears stung his eyes. "She is mortal. She will die and leave you, but I am divine. Say you are mine, and I will give you the desires of your heart. I will make you live forever." The last word snaked out to Odysseus across the sand and seemed to wrap itself around his mind. Angrily he turned to look at her. "Look, I told you!" And then he quite forgot what he told her. It didn't seem important. Nothing seemed important except those eyes, that smile, that perfect, flawless face. He felt himself stand and take her hand, and a tiny part of him in the back of his mind knew that it was about to happen again and he would hate himself later, but right now none of that mattered as he followed Calypso into her home. A tall, graceful man appeared in front of them. There was no showy flash, no crack of thunder. He was simply not there, and then he was there. Hermes, the quicksilver god, bowed to Calypso. "My lady Calypso," he laughed, raising a scandalous eyebrow. "Am I interrupting something?" "What do you want, Hermes?" asked Calypso. Through the haze of Calypso's spell, Odysseus was convinced it had just dropped a few degrees in temperature, and the music in the air had abruptly stopped. Now, jibed Hermes. "No need to get touchy. I shan't keep you for long. And speaking of keeping things for a long time, we need to talk about the mortal." Calypso turned her lamp-like gaze back on Odysseus, but there was no honey-sweet warmth to it now. "Odysseus, leave us." Still in a daze, Odysseus left the home and walked outside where clouds had hidden the sun and a storm seemed to be setting in. Back in the house, Calypso rounded on Hermes. "You cannot have him, Hermes. He's on my island. He is mine to claim." "Odysseus," mused Hermes. "Why, he's always been one of mine. Well, his grandfather was anyway. I've always had a soft spot for the lad, but no, I don't want him." Unfortunately, you're not allowed to keep him either. Says who? Challenged Calypso. Says Father Zeus, I'm afraid. Royal decree, signed, sealed, and, thanks to my presence, delivered. Hermes placed a scroll on Calypso's table, and they both stared at it for a moment. You gods, hissed Calypso. When you want a mortal, you take them, and the world is littered with your offspring. But when we goddesses do the same thing, you're all outrage. You're quite right, I'm sure, drawled Hermes. But are you really going to fight Zeus about it? No, conceded Calypso after a long pause. Fine. I'll let the mortal go. Now get off my island. The temperature had dropped even lower, and a slow roll of thunder sounded from outside. Hey, hey, reasoned Hermes. I just deliver the edicts, babe. Don't shoot the messenger. And with that, he was gone. Calypso stood still for a long time, then took an axe from the wall and went outside. The storm had passed now, but the sun was still behind clouds, and the sky was grey and overcast. Here, she said, throwing the axe at Odysseus's feet. Build yourself a raft. You ought to leave. Odysseus was silent for a moment. Is this a trick? Calypso smiled sadly. No trick. Someone in Olympus likes you. You are free. Odysseus darted forward and grabbed hold of the axe before she could change her mind, and for the next few days he set about building his means of escape. He cut down trees, wove ropes, and lashed together a raft. Then Calypso gave him food and clothes and water for the journey. We could have had something spectacular, you know, she said, and Odysseus was surprised to see genuine sadness in her eyes. I'm sorry, Lady Calypso, he replied, but I already do. With that, he pushed off the shore, and Calypso filled his sails with soft, gentle breeze. Odysseus breathed in deeply, and for the first time in a long time he felt joy in his heart. He was going home. Penelope, he breathed, I'm coming. For a few days he sailed smoothly on the breeze, but on the third day disaster arrived. Poseidon, the great god of the oceans, the earth-shaker himself, had noticed him. Zeus may have decreed Odysseus was to be free, but Poseidon certainly hadn't. Grasping his great trident in both hands, he stirred up the ocean beneath Odysseus, and a storm gathered. Back on the surface, Odysseus began to panic. The waves were huge now, and his tiny raft was starting to creak. As he watched, a rope snapped, and the craft began to give way. Lunging forward, he grabbed hold of the mast and wrapped himself around it as the wind and the waves delivered their final crushing blows to his vessel. Looking desperately up at the sky, he flung wide an urgent prayer to anyone who'd listen. Calypso says someone up there likes me, so please, help! At that moment, a pure white mermaid burst to the surface of the water, swimming effortlessly next to Odysseus as he clung to what was left of his raft. Take your clothes off, she said in a businesslike voice. Odysseus must have been half mad with fear because he replied, What is it with you supernatural creatures wanting to get my clothes off? Don't flatter yourself, Troy boy, the mermaid replied. You're hardly my type. I'm only here because someone sent me to make sure you didn't die. Now take your clothes off or the weight of them will drown you. Seeing the sense of what she said, Odysseus wrenched his clothes from his body as the storm whipped him across the waves. Now, keep hold of this and it will stop you from drowning. The mermaid handed him a scarf which Odysseus tied around his wrist. What now? He asked as his teeth began to chatter in the cold. Now you try not to breathe in seawater, replied the alabaster figure as she started to swim away. And mind you give that scarf back as soon as you reach land. And she was gone. Odysseus was tossed back and forth on the waves for 3 whole days, but the scarf he had been given kept his head above water. Eventually, on the 4th day, the clouds broke, and Odysseus saw land ahead of him. Exhausted, he summoned the very last of his strength and struck out for the shore. Dragging himself up the beach, he covered himself in sand and leaves and lay down to sleep. At the last moment, he remembered the mermaid's instruction and wrenched the scarf from his wrist, tossing it into the ocean. As he lay his head back down, he heard a voice call out across the waves, Thanks, Troy boy, good luck! And sleep claimed him.